Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today is the 12th day of the 12th month of the year 2020, which brought us a lot of new words and taught us to continuously adapt to new challenges. Let's hope the remainder of it will pass much more positively. Almost 2 years ago, in January 2019, Institute of Philology of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv hosted the EU Translated Conference. It was the first international conference in Ukraine dedicated solely to the EU acquis translation issues. Today's expert panel, Translating for the EU, is a continuation of the EU Translated Conference. And we are grateful to all involved whose contribution made this happen today. The Directorate General for Translation, and namely Merit Anna Ilya, Silva Kauko, and Jovana Stojkovska, the delegation of the European Union to Ukraine, the Government Office for Coordination of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, the EU-funded project Support for the Implementation of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement Phase 2, and namely Egle Rimkute, Davidas Kraučiūnas, Cezar Herma, Tomasz Tarkowski, and Tatiana Cherevik, the Department of Theory and Practice of Translation from English of the Institute of Philology of Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv, and namely Slava Lyudmila, and of course, supported by a humble servant, Alexei Tertichny, an owner and co-founder of Alesko Ukraine Translation Agency, focusing on acquis, legal, technical, and medical translations. Our today's session will consist of 4 presentations from 4 experienced and interesting speakers. After each speech, we will have a Q&A session. To ask questions, please use the Q&A functionality on Zoom desktop application. You may find respective button at the bottom menu. The session is streamed live to Facebook page of Association for You project and also is recorded. And before we proceed directly to the presentations, I would like to give the floor to Egle Rimkute, team leader of the EU-funded project Support for the Implementation of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement Phase 2, implemented by CPM Consultant International, for her welcoming speech. Dear Mrs. Rimkute, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexei. Welcome, everyone. Very nice to see you all this early Saturday morning, eager to learn about the EU law translation. And I'm really very, very happy that this international conference is taking place already for the 2nd year. And you may remember that back in spring, our plans to organize this conference have been postponed by the COVID pandemic. But we are all learning our ways how to live with a new reality. And we are happy that this initiative is growing, we hope, to an annual conference, which to our understanding is very much needed and very much required for the translation community in Ukraine and for the universities in Ukraine to grow and develop. And I think that today's topic does not come as a surprise. Translating for the EU. Translation or the EU law translation has become an inseparable part of the European integration. And I think that nowhere in the world this phenomenon of multilingual law is more evident than in the context of the European integration or European Union, which produces its law in 24 languages, with the aim that these laws are being uniformly applied throughout all its member states. And I think this multilingual nature of the EU law has consequences of how the meaning of the law may be found through interpretation. That's why this conference today is very important. And even more so that the association agreements with Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine are probably the most ambitious agreements ever signed by the European Union with its partner countries. And these association agreements, according to some calculations, they include the equivalent of around 70% of the EU acquis. That's why the quality translation is very important. And I'm happy that there is a high interest in learning the peculiarities of EU law translation. And it is very important to create the translation community or EU law translation community in Ukraine, because still the way forward towards European integration is very long one. And the role of the language, the role of quality translations is very important. And I'm very happy that today we have very prominent speakers and the colleagues from the DG for translation, who we believe will transform or will translate the peculiarities and the nature of the EU law translation to our colleagues, our translators, interpreters, and university colleagues in Ukraine. So I would like to wish a very successful panel. I would like to wish everyone to be very active and to take the chance to ask questions which are relevant for you in your daily work. So let me wish you a productive panel, and I hope that we will see also next year, not under pandemic conditions, but already in a new reality. But we will be able to see each other in person and to have more discussions, not only during the panels, but also in between the sessions. So have a fruitful day, ask questions, and I hope that we will all learn together a lot. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Rimkute. We also have another important guest who would like to say some welcoming words. This is Alexander Shapoval. He is a state expert of the expert group for coordinating association agreement implementation, EU acquis, translation, and international technical cooperation with the EU. Government Government Office for Coordination of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. Mr. Shapoval, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Alexei. Good morning, distinguished guests and participants of the conference. I'm happy to meet all you here today. I would like to deliver my thanks to my alma mater university, EU-funded project Association for EU Phase 2, and Aleisko Translation Center for organizing it. EU acquis is a system of specific legal instruments, translation of which requires deep understanding of EU law system. The EU acquis translation plays an important role in the sustainability of the process of approximation of Ukrainian legislation to the European law. Foreign experience in this field is important and valuable for Ukraine, and I'm glad that this conference has become a platform for the exchange of experience and contacts on an annual basis. Ukraine has capable and skilled professionals who champion quality translations of EU acquis, and this event gives a possibility to connect these professionals with the foreign colleagues. It also contributes to improvement of legislation in Ukraine by better understanding of EU law through high quality translations. I'm glad that this event draws the attention to the importance of high quality translations in Ukraine. I wish you a good and productive day, weekend day, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shapoval, for your welcoming words. We are now going to go straight to our presentations, and I would like to introduce our first speaker. This is Mr. Marcin Stryjecki. He is a Deputy Director of Directorate B and Head of the Polish Language Department at DGT. Before joining DGT, he was a desk officer for Ukraine in DG Relex, in charge of negotiations on cooperation policies of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. And he will have a speech on translating at the European Commission, shaping the future of translation topic. Mr. Stryjecki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm really very happy to be with you here today. Unfortunately, not in person, but through the video conference link. But anyway, it's reminding me good old days when I was visiting Kiev and other cities in your beautiful country on a regular basis when we were negotiating the association agreement. And I'm very glad to hear that the association agreement is actually being mentioned by by the first speakers who already were talking about the importance of translating this text, because indeed it constitutes the quite significant part of the acquis that, let's hope, you will have to adopt in 100% in the near future. We were working on it very, very hard in DG Relex, and I really believe, from the perspective of relatively new member states, from the perspective of Poland, it is a very important piece of translation. And it must be really very carefully done, because it constitutes the legal basis for functioning of a country, for functioning of the relations with others, and functioning of the life of citizens within this new legal environment, which we hope is the best possible in the world. Well, let's go to my presentation then. I hope it would work. Alex, if you can correct me if something goes wrong. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we see them perfectly.
Okay, lovely. So let's go to the point. As Alexei has already said, I'm the Deputy Director in DG Translation, the translation service of the European Commission. And today I will speak mostly about issues related to my organization. However, I would also tackle a little bit the questions related to the overall linguistic environment of the translation in European institutions. As you probably know, the European Commission is not the only institution which is shaping the legislative background, legislative framework for the European citizens. So we cooperate closely with other important institutions, our effectively decision-taking bodies, European Parliament and European Council. So I will just tackle them briefly. Then I will concentrate on the issues of translation in DGT, what I know best, and what could be, I believe, quite interesting for you. And especially I will concentrate on issues related to IT tools. However, most of the interesting stuff I will leave to a colleague of mine who will speak later. Josef will present you all the IT toys we are using every day for making our translation better, more efficient, more useful for our staff, and making our life simply easier. I will also speak about the terminological aspect, because this presentation is supposed to tackle the issue of the future of translation and the future of the translator as a profession. And in this respect, terminology plays extremely important part. And also I would like to tackle the issue of the quality control, which is very close to my heart. And the use of the technology, use of work organization in our in DGT, the quality control constitutes actually the core of our function as a translation service for the Commission. So let's get to the question why we are translating. Actually, before, as Alexei has already mentioned, I was not a translator. I've never been actually a translator. I was working in various fields, in various organizations for many years in the Commission, in other services. And only work in DG translation make me realize how important actually it is to speak in the right language to the right people. And for us, the translation is actually the core element of democratic construction of the European Union. Through all my life, I was mostly working in foreign languages, but not really so much in Polish. However, I now realize how important it is to bring the message about our activities of the European Union, and also to understand that people of European Union have a right, and this is one of the basic rights, to get access to their legislation. And as you know, the legislation of the European Union is created not only at the national level, but also at the central level. And to have access to this legislation through their own native tongue. That's why we invest heavily in making sure that these translations are equally good as the originals we are creating, and they are providing the legal background for all member states, for all our citizens, in which they can operate not only in English or in French or in German, which are the three procedural languages of the European Commission, but also they can function in their own languages, which is absolutely essential, and it is absolutely core element of the democratic principles of the European Union functioning. Actually, that has been quite a long process for all of us when joining the language communities. Of course, it has followed the natural path of enlargements. As you probably know, the first languages that were the foundations of the cooperation in Europe, when it was of the European then community, which were used were Dutch, French, German, and Italian. And later on, with further enlargements, more and more languages were incorporating it into this framework of working together, living together. The last wave of languages that we are dealing with are Romanian, Bulgarian, and Irish. And here perhaps an interesting thing that actually, of course, Ireland joined the European Union much earlier than in 2007. However, only in 2007, the government of the Republic of Ireland decided to ask for incorporation of the Irish language into the family of the official languages of the European Union. Those are the languages in which we are providing the full coverage of the translating legislative text into the country languages. The only exception in the European Union of a country which official language is not actually covered by such services is the country where I live, Luxembourg. However, knowing the very good knowledge of foreign languages by Luxembourgish citizens who speak, I think, the highest number of foreign languages of all the European citizens in the European countries, that simply it has been decided that this burden is not necessary, since they have access to all the legislation, all the information coming from the European Commission in one of the languages that anyway can speak. So actually it has been a very, very long process where we got into the language environment in which we are right now. As you can hear, I'm speaking English to you, and the fact that the United Kingdom is regrettably leaving the European Union very soon, has actually left, but now it's in the transition process. It does not mean that English is not going to be an official language any longer. This is the language in which most of the Commission and European institutions are working, maybe with an exception of the European Court of Justice. And the English language, we believe, will stay still the lingua franca of the European integration. It still remains an official language in a couple of other member states like Ireland, Malta, and Cyprus. So it is not something artificial, but at the same time, it is quite natural that for working together, we have to have a platform for sharing our thoughts, sharing our opinions. And still until now, it remains the key language in which the Commission is working, and from which most probably you will be translating most of the legislative text of the acquis, which has been already mentioned. As far as the importance of the translation in the legislative process is not only translating as such, As we've already discussed, the law is created by a number of institutions. It's not only the European Commission, which has the right of proposing the new pieces of legislation, but they are also our political masters in the European Parliament and the European Council. Through these institutions, most of the legislation goes. Of course, there is a certain number of types of documents which end up in the legislative process with the European Commission. And here we, as DGT, we have particularly important role because if we make any errors, they might automatically become errors in the legislation of the member states. And nobody's actually going to correct our possible misdeeds. We are very much trying to avoid any errors, but as you very well know, translation is a very tricky business, and despite all the efforts, sometimes the errors appear. However, to my surprise, they appear much less often than I anticipated before coming to work for DGT. And here in this legislative process, I also wanted to mention an interesting, perhaps, aspect that we are actually the last frontier, the last correctors of the legislation which is being created by our colleagues in line DGs. Well, I assume that most of the participants at today's conference are translators. And you very well know that nobody's reading more carefully an original than the translator who has to translate it. And from this experience comes actually an ongoing process of improving the text which are being submitted to us. I will speak about it in more detail in a couple of minutes, but this is an aspect which is particularly important, that we are providing necessary feedback for the authors on possible misunderstandings, of possible errors, on possible bad formulations, which unfortunately happen very, very often, because as you very well know, the European Commission is not only staffed by the native speakers, English native speakers, as somebody told me one day, that actually the EU legislation is created by people speaking English, but speaking English poorly, and trying to very often, we are trying to correct the possible errors that appear in the legislative text created by experts in particular areas, but not necessarily people who are linguists, who are aware of all the specificities of the English language, and we are trying to make it right. So it is a very important element in making the EU legislation as good as we can achieve through the ongoing dialogue between the translators and the authors of the legislation. As I already told you, we are not the only organization, we DGT, European Commission, we are not the only organization which is responsible for translations in European institutional environment. Actually, most of the European institutions have their own translation service. We've been discussing the possible integration of some linguistic services for years now. However, for many reasons, it's not possible, and it wouldn't be very efficient, I believe. There are certain specificities for work of each of the organizations. And actually, this distinction between the translation of the Commission and later stages with translation of the legislation by the European Parliament and the European Council gives us another level of the safety net that we are having for a possible correction of errors, and also ensure that there is another pair of eyes, or actually a couple of pairs of eyes, who are revising the text again and again, trying to make it as close to the original as it is only possible. On top of the three, I would say, main decision-taking powers of the European structure, of course, there are other important European players. There is Court of Justice, which is having its own linguistic service. However, in comparison to ours, it differs very much from the point of view of the linguistic combination, because the court is actually the only organization in the European institutional environment which works in French. So that really very much differs from us. However, we are working very closely, since they, in their proceedings, they are dealing very often with the text which we are translating first, and then if there are any complaints, if there are any misunderstandings, if there are any issues which have to be improved or differently interpreted, they are dealing with these cases. And also there are other institutions which are also having their translation services for their internal purposes: Court of Auditors, European Investment Bank, the Translation Center of the European institutions, which is serving the agencies of the European Union. The last three are situated in Luxembourg as well, and we also work with them very, very closely. There is, of course, European Central Bank with its translation services, which are completely different than ours, because they don't deal really very much with the legislation, but rather with the proceedings of the bank. And there is, of course, the European Economic and Social Committee in Brussels, which is also supporting its members with the translation services. That concerns, of course, the written translation. Some of these organizations have also the interpreters. Sometimes we share the interpreters, like with the Council and the Parliament, we share the same service for interpretation on certain occasions. Then Parliament has its own service of interpretation for some other occasions. It is actually quite complicated environment, I would say, but we must admit, I must admit that I think it's working really pretty well, bearing in mind that we are the most complicated, linguistically at least, organization in the world. The UN is limiting itself in different configurations to 6 or even less official languages. We are dealing with 24 official languages, and each of them has the same status. So it really doesn't depend whether it is Germany or France, the biggest countries of the European Union, or it's a tiny country in the Mediterranean, which not necessarily is very numerous in terms of its citizens, but it has the same importance in terms of being provided with high quality linguistic support. As far as of the cost of translation, this is the question which is being raised from time to time. It was also raised pretty often during the campaign before Brexit. Actually, this cost for the European citizens are, I would say, rather minor. We are talking about something like 2 to 2.5 euros per year for each European citizen. And they constitute a very tiny part of the annual budget of the EU. However, as I've said, this is an essential element. This is actually a cornerstone of the European integration, which simply cannot be forgotten about. And our services are actually very, very highly rated by our requesters. So we very much believe it's a very good investment. However, of course, we are facing the financial constraints as any public administration these days. And going through the new reorganization of the Commission, we were told that we would have to face very significant cuts of our personnel. We should do more in terms of translated pages with less staff. Our reaction was that it's very difficult, that we might have really very big problems with achieving this goal. So the political message has been changed, and we were ensured that we should do more and better with less. So that's what we are trying to do right now. As far as the staffing of DG Translation is concerned, we are one of the biggest Directorate General in the Commission, where the total staffing is around 2,100 personnel. Almost 70%, right now actually more than 70%, the statistics are from last year, but we are hitting 70% of the staff who are real translators, so people doing the real job. However, they are supported by the large group of assistants, and these assistants are playing particularly important role in our business model. Those are not secretaries who are making coffees to the managers. They are highly trained, highly professional specialists in dealing with IT issues, formatting of documents, quality controls, interaction with freelance. So actually, out of our staff of 2,100, around 90% is working on the translation as such. Of course, they are supported with some services who deal with finance, with legal aspects. They are managers, of course, but they all constitute around 10% of the overall staffing of DGT. We are also one of the one of the DGs which are dominated by women, which is very highly appreciated, and which brings us also in terms of the composition of the management team to the one of the best balances, one of the most equal situation in terms of women as managers, women as directors, and we think it's the right model. We see the added value, although unfortunately, regrettably, I cannot represent this majority of women in DGT here today, but I would say it is the model that is being right now followed by the rest of the Commission, and the Commission in itself is trying to, is aiming at gender balancing at least senior management and middle management posts. We are actually one of the very few DGs that are both in Brussels and in Luxembourg. Of course, it constitutes additional logistic problems for us. Some language departments are split between Luxembourg and Brussels, and they have to cooperate with each other. However, now in pandemic times, actually nobody knows and nobody sees any difference, because anyway, we are all working from home. We are connecting through various platforms. Today, actually, it's pretty a challenge, and I'm very happy that it's working, because it's the first time when I'm delivering presentation in Zoom. Usually we are using different platforms. But since Alexei is not protesting, it seems that it's going quite okay. Yes, good. So let's try to keep it like that. As far as the Commission aims and the Commission objectives, we are trying to work as much as possible on the quality of the text which we are delivering. It's our raison d'être, effectively, and this is something which we really pay a very much attention to. Especially now when there are so many alternatives to the human translation in forms of translation, we believe that this is the core function of DGT to ensure the quality. We also deal with other things which not necessarily are directly related to translation of EU legislation, but we are also working on something which is very close to my heart. We are working on the clear writing, so to make sure that our authors, the non-English speakers, are provided with necessary assistance to make their work much more understandable to the European citizens, and at the same time to give a better environment for our translators to work, because as translators you very well understand that actually translating from a bad original is much more difficult than translating from a good original. So we've got clearly a self-interest in our campaign for clear writing. We are also working very closely with the EMT network, so-called EMT network. That's the network of universities in Europe, which are cooperating on the common curricula, on the common approach to teaching their students. And this is something which is very important, becoming more important nowadays. And of course, we are also cooperating closely with other international organizations. We are working with UN. We are working with other leading partners in the translation business, not only the public bodies. Perhaps some of you know that the Commission has developed its own e-translation, the neural machine translation engines for all the language combinations of the European languages, also including some languages from outside of the EU. And this is actually a very success story, very much success story, since we are actually competing with big players like Facebook, like Microsoft, and in the competitions which are being organized on the quality of these engines, the e-translation is showing as one of the best tools in the world as far as the legal texts are being concerned. We are now making the e-translation available to small and medium-sized companies in the member states. And we hope that in the future, perhaps it will be also available wider in terms of use for European citizens outside of Europe. The last issue, as I wanted to mention in terms of the parts of our activities, is the terminology, and particularly the TITA, which is the international base of terms, actually the biggest international dictionary and resource in terms of the European legislation and European terms. There are just some statistics, but I will rush through them very, very quickly. I presume my presentation will be made available to the participants later on, so you can look into the statistics yourself. DGT is translating roughly 2 million of pages per year. This year will be more because we are very, very busy. As I already told you, the main issue, the main language from which we are translating is English. And clearly there's an overall dominance of English language since the enlargement. Well, it has been for quite a while, but now it is very, very visible. All the legislation is created actually in English, so it is determining our work. As far as the languages to which we are translating, English also is on the top. However, it is a result of the right of European citizens to write their comments, questions, and to interact with the European Commission in their own languages. And of course, for us, for the European officials, it's necessary to understand this correspondence. So that's why a relatively high number of texts in English, translated into English. The stuff, as I've been talking about, is not only the 2100, which I mentioned already. We also cooperate with hundreds of agencies all over Europe to support us in our production. Actually, as you can see, it's even more than 30% of all our production, which is now being translated by freelance agencies. And it is a natural trend right now. As I've been already telling you, the decline of the staff, we have to compensate with something, and we compensate it mostly with the outsourcing of the documents and asking freelance to translate the texts for us. As far as the composition of the translation is concerned, we are mostly, actually now it's more than 50%, translating EU legislation. And this is the most challenging and most important element of our work. Of course, we deal also with external communication and other aspects of the European life. We provide a number of tools, a number of services which are available to our customers within the Commission. We support them in the drafting process. Perhaps I will now only tackle the translation tools. Josef will speak more about the translation tools. He will explain you what sort of IT developments have been already developed and will be available to us in the future. I just wanted to tackle the issue of TITA, which I would also encourage you to use in legal translations in dealing with European texts in European issues. This is a database which is available to everybody. You can use it. You can search for terms. You can search for their translations. Another interesting place where you can find inspiration for your work as translators is the Eurolex. This acquis that we talked about earlier is actually all there. So all the legislative texts of the European Union are in one place, translated in all European Union languages. And we try to keep it as accurate and as up to date as possible. So any reference to the European legislation can be found there. We've already talked about the importance of equal treatment of all the languages, but as the last element of my presentation, I wanted to tackle a little bit the issue of the quality management, because this is something which for us constitutes the biggest challenge. This is something which is absolutely necessary, and this is something which we very much encourage all our partners to pay attention to, because nowadays one can get a rough translation of a document to understand what the text is all about through Google or Facebook whatsoever. But if we are talking about legislation, we simply cannot afford to make mistakes. That's why we are working from the very early stage of the development of documents. We are helping to edit documents. I've already told you about the clear writing campaign. We support the authors with so-called early lead translators who are working hand in hand with the authors on drafting the pieces of legislation. And we help them to make this text as good as possible. During translation, as I've already told you, we interact with the authors, and as soon as we spot any errors, we communicate it to them. It leads usually to the improvements of the text and adoption of our suggestions. And we also work on this text after the translation. Sometimes when the errors are spotted, this is the responsibility of DGT to correct these errors. We organize a number of events all over Europe. Unfortunately, we are usually restricted to the territory of the European Union, but perhaps especially the Translating Europe forums could be interesting for you. This year, we already organized the Translating Europe Forum completely virtually, and probably we will continue like that. So also participants from Ukraine would be able to log in and join us and see the discussion on the key issues of translation and the future of translation as being tackled by the participants of these large conferences organized every year, normally in Brussels, but nowadays, because of obvious reasons, virtually. We also organize a number of Translating Europe workshops in the member states. Some of them are just around the corner for you because, well, I'm personally responsible for Polish language department, and we organize a number of workshops in Poland. So there are also workshops organized in other member states, and you can find more about it on our website. We are trying to communicate about these events as widely and as openly as it is only possible, because we believe that only through open cooperation we can make sure that these things we are working on are having any meaning. And we are trying to help each other through clear, direct communication and through involving the key players in the world of translation in our work. So I very much encourage you to click on some of these links later on and to have a look at details of what we are doing. Just to sum up and talk about a little bit about the future, I think that we are now approaching the era where the machines are going to be integrated more and more into the world of translation, at least the legal translation. And for us, really the future of our role later on top of all of these activities, as actually which I've already described, is actually the issue of ensuring the quality control and working on terminology. We are translating less and less. We are checking somebody else's or machine translations more and more. And this is a clear trend which is evolving through the last years. And this is something which we simply have to accept, because there is simply no other way for us to go on with the translations as they are. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your attention. I've tried to be as brief as possible. I hope that I've fitted in more or less in this 35 minutes, which has been given to me. In case you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them now. Of course, I'm also at your disposal later on through my email address. I'm rather a busy person, so don't be offended if I don't immediately answer your email, but I will always try to do so. So I would like to open the floor for the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stryjecki. It was very interesting indeed. Okay, so actually I don't see questions in the Q&A session and Q&A functionality. Actually, I would encourage our participants to write questions there and we will ask them. But while listening, I was noting a lot. I will not ask all the questions I have because during your presentation you covered some of them. Actually, one of the most interesting thing, I think it will be also interesting for all the participants, if the situation happens, there is an error or mistake in the translation, in the document, and I mean in acquis, I mean legislative acts, which is the procedure of correcting it, which is the way, how do you correct them, and how do you ensure that this mistake is actually corrected, and how many times one document can be corrected?
Thank you for this question. Well, first, document can be corrected many times. We are dealing with such complex issues, like, for example, right now we are translating the agreement with the United Kingdom. And it's right now something like 2,000 pages. Which we are translating under very much pressure, and we are sure that there will be errors. Simply, it's impossible to keep it without errors, and we already incorporate into the translation process a possibility for correcting these errors later on, and they could be corrected either by us if it is an act which Commission is taking the full responsibility. Then one should contact DGT for correcting it. But sometimes when these documents are when these legal acts are responsibility of the co-decision procedure, where Parliament and the Council are involved, usually it's the Council legal linguists, as they are called, are correcting these errors. Later on, they are informing us about it, so we can change it in Eurolex, because this is later on the basis for acting of all subjects in the European Union. Sometimes these processes are more complicated than it would seem, because it requires consultations with national authorities, consultations with legal linguists in the Commission, legal linguists in the Parliament. But we've got procedures for that, and we correct hundreds of errors per year in different legislative texts. Sometimes when we see that something is really very wrongly translated, we incorporate further revision of the whole text with checking whether there are no other errors in it. But it's very rare case. Usually when the error is spotted, we should be informed about it. And then we know which procedure we should follow, whether it would be us or the Council or the Parliament who will be working on it. And if the error is well deserves correction, we usually try to do it as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And we actually have some questions from our participants. The first question from Mariana Fostek. You mentioned that you will have to do more with less. Do you have any standard in place as how too many pages should be translated per day?
There is a theory and there is a practice. My department in 2020 has a work rate of above 11 pages per day. And that includes translation and quality control. We differently, of course, calculate. I don't want to get into the details, but more or less it is 11 pages per day. The overall work rate of other departments very much differs because it depends on the number of staff, it depends on the number of translations coming, but 11 pages is what we do in the Polish language department. But it's not only the number of pages which is a problem, but the problem really lies in the very short deadlines that we are having. As we are speaking right now, at least 15 of my translators are working on documents which normally should have been translated during the week. However, we received so-called versions to them, which must be ready for Monday morning. Because of the legislative process before the next week college meeting, it has to be ready in all languages. And these versions are actually creating us, which now constitute more than 20% of our overall production. They are at least twice as heavy in terms of the workload as translating documents from the scratch. So it is nominally 20%, but in practical terms, it's something like 30–40% of our work to catching up with the corrections done by the requesters. But we are a political organization. We have to follow our political masters who sometimes work during weekends. So we also work during weekends.
Okay, thank you very much. And more questions here. Who actually, from Olena Zaruma, there is a question, who conducts a final proofreading? How does a translation acquire a status of a legally binding document?
Well, the document is becoming legally binding as soon as the legislative process is finished. We are usually we are finalizing our translation before the document is adopted. But as far as the quality control, we've got something called quality framework. And depending on the type of the document, we apply different measures of the second paraphrase, sometimes even the third if it's necessary. For checking the quality. However, normally the overall responsibility for a translation remains with the translator who translated the text, or the coordinator of the translation process, because sometimes documents are being translated by more than one translator. Like the agreement with the UK, there is something like 20 translators working on it right now. On top of this, 20 who are working during the weekend on another text. So the responsibility remains for accepting or rejecting error comments from the reviser, as we call the second paraphrase, remains with the translator who was initially translating the text.
And one more last question is from Antonin. Unfortunately, to see the surname, but actually, what is the demand for Ukrainian and Russian languages in the EU? Is it present there actually? Is it any demand for our Slavic languages in the EU?
Well, for the time being, we have developed the engines for e-translation from Russian into most of the, I think already now we've got it into all EU languages. We don't really have much human capacity to work on these translations because, well, we are serving mostly the European institutions, and of course sometimes it is necessary to understand what is written in Ukrainian or in Russian, but this is being dealt with through freelance, and some departments have a capacity to work with the Russian text. The Estonian department, the Latvian departments are checking it. As far as the Ukrainian is concerned, I'm afraid we don't have any capacity in DGT to check the translations being submitted by our freelance. However, I think we've got freelance agencies who are providing this sort of services. But honestly, I cannot tell you about the statistics, that I'm not aware. If there are any translations that those are very, very minor, you are extremely gentle people. And if you are writing to us, usually you are writing in English. which we really very much appreciate. And I very much hope that one day we will also have the Ukrainian language service, and then after the, let's hope for coming enlargement, I will have a chance to work with my Ukrainian colleagues as I did in the past, but now as my fellow translators in DGT, which is actually my great hope and wish to you.
Thank you. And the last one, actually really last one and very short question, and I will appreciate the short answer. Actually, do you have any disputes about translations from local national authorities after they are published? This is a question from Denis Dorosh, and it is very relevant for the Ukrainian environment, actually.
Well, yes, definitely. And sometimes those are very, very helpful comments, because as I've already told you, we really don't have a magic wand for ensuring that all our translations are correct. And we simply make mistakes. We don't have expertise in all the areas. And you know, Commission is working in every possible area that you can imagine, actually. So sometimes we simply don't know how this comments from the member state usually concerns the terminological issues. And we apply the corrections if these comments are justifiable through the corrigenda procedures when we are improving our translations. And I very much believe that this cooperation is very helpful for both sides, because after all, what we are doing for, as Polish language department, we are doing it for Polish citizens. And the government is representing these citizens in their dialogue with us. We don't cooperate only with the government as such. Of course, we've got the official framework to work with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but we also cooperate with many organizations in Poland who support us in finding the best linguistic expressions for particular issues. There are new areas in which we are entering. Now this is a big issue with space and aviation that we are getting more and more involved. There is a Green Deal, which is also opening the new areas of responsibilities of the European Union. So we are really very much keen on cooperating with the national authorities. And usually it's a very constructive dialogue. So this is, of course, the mutual interest of both sides to make these translations as good as we only can.
Okay, I think that's all with questions. Thank you very much for your presentation.